welcome to ZOZO Sleepy Stories. We're thrilled to have you here for another cozy tale to spark your imagination. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your friends and family. Your support helps us keep the bedtime magic alive. Now, grab your blanket, get comfy, and let's dive into tonight's story. Close your eyes and imagine with me a castle long ago. Its stones are cold, its corridors narrow, and its torches burn with a trembling light that throws shadows along the walls. The night outside is deep and heavy, the kind of night where even the wind hesitates, brushing against the ramparts like a cautious hand. And somewhere in those winding halls, footsteps echo softly, not from a knight in gleaming armor, not from a lord returning to his chamber, but from someone almost unseen, a figure wrapped in the folds of silence itself. That figure is what we might call a medieval assassin. Yet the word itself may conjure pictures from films and games. Hooded heroes leaping gracefully across rooftops, blades flashing in the moonlight, history itself shaped by their daring strikes. But the truth, dear listener, was far less glamorous. It was colder, rougher, and lonelier. And tonight, in the safe quiet of your bed, I will tell you about them not as legends, but as human beings who walked through shadows, who lived with secrets, and who rarely lived long. No one in the Middle Ages grew up dreaming of such a path. Children dreamt of bread that lasted through winter, of goats that gave milk, of fields that yielded enough to keep the family fed. They did not dream of slipping through doorways with a dagger in hand. To become an assassin was not a choice made with joy. It was, more often than not, the final step when life had already stripped away other choices. A peasant who lost his land, a soldier disgraced, a thief with nowhere left to run, these were the ones who slipped into the cloak of the unseen. Yet, let us not hurry. Let us linger in the castle hallway a little longer. Can you hear the silence? It is not the silence of peace, but the silence of watchfulness, of fear. Each shadow might hide a guard. Each door might open suddenly. Each breath might betray a presence. For the assassin, every night was like this, half alive, half fading into the stones around them, hoping that the next step would not be the last. It was not training in mountaintop temples or whispered instruction under candlelight that shaped them. Their teachers were hunger and desperation. Their lessons were survival. A stumble in the dark meant discovery. A wrong turn could mean the noose or the fire. So they learned quickly, not from scrolls or masters, but from the sheer force of having no choice. And yet, even as we sit together tonight, it is easy to feel the pull of their world, because there is something haunting about lives lived in silence. We live now in a world where noise surrounds us, where light shines long after the sun sets. But in those days, the night was vast, the dark was heavy, and the smallest sound, a creak, a cough, the clink of metal, carried far. It made invisibility almost magical. To move unseen was to defy the very order of the night. Perhaps that is why peasants whispered that assassins were touched by curses or guided by demons. How else could a man slip past guards and vanish into the dark? Superstition was the language of fear, and so assassins became figures of shadow not only in body, but in imagination. They were blamed for sudden deaths, whispered about in markets, and feared even when no one could prove they were real. But here is the truth, softer and sadder. Behind every whisper was a man or woman with calloused hands, weary eyes, and a heart that beat faster than most. They were not demons. They were not legends. They were people who carried their poverty on their backs like a stone. People who found themselves walking paths no child ever wished for. Imagine, if you will, the moment they were hired. Not in a grand hall with banners waving, but in the back corner of a tavern. The fire sputtering low, the smell of ale thick in the air, and a coin purse pushed across the table. No promises, no contract signed, only a whisper, a name. Not a farmer, not a shepherd, but someone powerful. A baron with guards, a bishop with wealth, a noble with enemies. The kind of person whose death would ripple through the land. And the one tasked to bring that ripple? A man who might not live to see the sun rise again. It was never noble. It was never romantic. It was survival dressed in shadow. And when the deed was done, there was no parade, no victory feast. There was only running through alleyways, across fields, toward rivers, always away from the scene of the act, away from guards, away even from the very people who had paid for the deed. For once it was finished. The assassin was no longer useful. He was dangerous, a secret that breathed, a witness that walked. So he would vanish again into the night, nameless, faceless, forgotten. His footsteps would fade, his story swallowed by the stones, and history would go on without him. And perhaps that is the greatest truth of all. When we think of assassins, we imagine history makers, but in reality, they erased themselves from history with every act. They became shadows in the margins, never remembered, never honored, never safe. Only silence followed them. Now, as you lie here listening, you may feel the heaviness of their footsteps in the corridors of imagination. Not as fear, but as a kind of gentle echo, a reminder that history is not always written by the powerful. Sometimes it is carried in the quiet lives of the forgotten, the ones who left no name carved in stone, but whose shadows still move softly through our stories. So let us pause here, at the end of this first night's journey. The torches flicker lower, the castle grows still, and in the corner of your mind, a figure slips through the hall, unseen, unheard, disappearing once more into the dark. Rest easy, dear listener. The story has only just begun. The night has deepened. The torches in our imagined castle have burned lower, their flames curling like tired dancers, their light softening into gold. Outside, the world is still, yet within the story, footsteps remain. Quiet, careful, never steady for long. For what, you might ask, could drive a person to walk such a path? What would make anyone choose a life in the shadows, hiding daggers in cloth, whispering names in dark corners? The answer, though simple, is heavier than steel. Coin. Imagine the gleam of silver in the dim light of a tavern. To us, it might seem small, a few pieces no more than a handful. But to a man who has not eaten in days, to a woman cast out of her village, to one who has nothing left but hunger and despair, those coins are life itself. They promise food, warmth, perhaps a few weeks of survival. They promise tomorrow. And tomorrow was worth almost any risk. In the world of the Middle Ages, money was not just metal. It was freedom. It was the difference between sleeping in a ditch or under a roof, between silence in the stomach or bread in the hand. Those who walked the assassin's path were not dreaming of riches, of great estates or jewels. They dreamed only of surviving the season, of finding a way to live one more day. But here lies the cruel twist of fate. The promise of coin was often a lie. A pouch offered in secret came with strings invisible yet deadly, half paid now, half promised later, and later often never arrived. Clients vanished. Promises were broken. Sometimes, instead of silver, the assassin received betrayal, a blade in the back, a final reminder that in this shadowed profession, trust was more dangerous than swords. Still, they returned again and again to the whispered offers, because what else could they do? The world left them no other place. No guild welcomed them. No trade took them in. They were too scarred, too shunned, too desperate. And so, in smoky taverns, in corners of markets, at the edge of campfires, they listened for the sound of coin. They lived for it. They died for it. It is easy, here in the warmth of the present, to imagine their choices as cruel, their deeds unforgivable. But let us soften our gaze. Let us see them not only as figures with knives, but as human souls pressed by the crushing weight of need. The Middle Ages were not kind. Famine, disease, war, all pressed down like a heavy sky. A peasant might starve after a single failed harvest. A soldier might be broken by one lost battle. A thief might lose a hand for a loaf of bread. And in that world, coin whispered louder than conscience. Picture, if you will, one such figure. A man named Thomas, perhaps, though no record will ever preserve him. He once tilled the earth, bent his back in the fields, praying for rain. But the harvest failed. His lord demanded taxes still. Hunger gnawed at his family until the day came when they were gone, one by one, claimed by sickness and cold. Alone, Thomas wandered. He begged, he stole, he was caught. And when chains rusted on his wrists, he thought his life was over. But somehow he escaped, and in escaping, he fell further into shadow. One night, in the corner of an inn, a stranger slid a coin purse across the table. A name, the stranger whispered. A task. Do it, and you live another month. Thomas hesitated, but hunger left him no room for hesitation. His hand closed on the purse. In that moment, he stepped onto a road from which there was no return. He would not be remembered in chronicles. He would not be sung in songs. He would not even be whispered about beyond the lifetime of those who knew him. But for that night, for that month, for that fleeting chance at life, he became what the world most feared, a man with nothing left to lose. And so it was for countless others. The assassin's trade was not one of glory, but of desperation. It was not a profession chosen by the mighty, but one stumbled upon by the broken. Each coin they earned carried the weight of their hunger, their loneliness, their despair. The silver pieces clinked not like treasure, but like chains. Sometimes when the job was done, when the coins were counted, when the assassin sat alone in the corner of a room, he would wonder, was it worth it? The answer seldom mattered, for by then the coins were already spent, and another whisper waited at another table. Do you hear, in this story, the sound of coin falling? It is not loud, it is soft, almost like rain on stone. And yet, in the silence of the night, that sound carried across lives, across choices, across the hidden corridors of history. It was the sound of survival, of desperation, of countless forgotten souls who bartered their humanity for the promise of tomorrow. Tonight, as you rest, let us not judge them too harshly. Let us, instead, see them with compassion. They were not demons in hoods, nor heroes in disguise. They were men and women who bore the heavy weight of coin, who lived under its shadow, who faded into silence because the world gave them no other way. So let us lay down the coin for now. Let it rest on the table of history. The fire in the inn has burned low. The assassin has slipped back into the night. And as we drift deeper into our story, another figure waits in the distance, not cloaked in shadow, but robed in prophecy, a queen with serpents whose whispers would shape the fate of empires. But that, dear listener, is for another part of our tale. The night has carried us far, yet deeper shadows remain. Beyond the narrow streets of medieval towns, beyond the whispers of coin and daggers in the dark, there is another place, older, stranger, where myth and history entwine. Let us step now into the ancient world, where gods were not yet silent, and queens walked with serpents. Her name, as the world remembers it, was Olympias. But before that, she was Myrtle, a young princess of Epirus, born in a land of mountains and rivers, where the air was thick with ritual, and the people claimed descent from the heroes of Troy. To her kin, the blood of Achilles himself flowed through their veins. A spark of divine fire passed from battlefield to battlefield until it rested in her. But Olympias was not a girl of embroidery and quiet corners. She was drawn to the mysteries of the gods. From her youth, she wandered into sacred groves where snakes curled among stones, where priestesses danced barefoot in the moonlight, their voices lifted in wild song to Dionysus, the god of ecstasy. There, beneath the glow of torches, she swayed with the dancers, hair unbound, eyes bright with trance, as though the divine itself had touched her spirit. The people whispered that she kept sacred serpents in her chamber, letting them coil beside her in sleep, their scales cool against her skin. Was it truth, or was it rumor born of fear? We do not know. Yet even now, the image lingers. The young princess with snakes for companions, her very presence unsettling, half woman, half oracle. In a world where men wrote the chronicles, such tales were dangerous. To her allies, she was holy. To her enemies, she was dangerous. But either way, she was unforgettable. Now imagine her on the island of Samothrace, where ancient rites were performed beneath the stars. There, among smoke and sacred chants, she met a man who would change the course of her destiny, Philip II of Macedon. He was ruthless, brilliant, already a conqueror, and always hungry for more. To him, Olympias was not just a princess. She was mystery itself, a woman bound to omens, her eyes reflecting something older than kingdoms. Their union was not simple marriage. It was collision. Some say lightning split the sky on their wedding night. Others claim Olympias dreamed of a thunderbolt entering her womb, a vision of divine fire that foretold a son like no other. From such omens, legends were born, and whether or not the gods truly touched her, Olympias believed in destiny. She believed her life, her body, her very spirit were threads woven into a pattern far greater than herself. To the world, she became queen. To Philip, she became both wife and rival. But to herself, she became something else entirely, the guardian of prophecy, the keeper of a storm yet to come. It is easy to see her as harsh, even cruel, for history records her vengeance and her power. Yet in the quiet of our story, let us see also the woman beneath. A mother who would raise a son to believe he was touched by Zeus. A queen who slept with omens and woke with fears. A serpent who learned that in a palace of men, survival required more than charm. It required fire. When Alexander was born, the whispers grew louder. Flames danced around him in dreams. Lions appeared in visions. Thunder rumbled without storm. Olympias held her infant and saw not just a child, but a future already burning. She believed with every breath that he was meant to conquer, and from his first cry, she vowed that nothing and no one would stand in his way. But vows are heavy things, heavier even than daggers or coins. To guard Alexander's destiny, Olympias would need to walk through shadows darker than any assassin's corridor. She would need to strike first, to strike silently, to strike without mercy. For in Macedon, the palace itself was a battlefield, and queens were expected to smile even as the knives closed in. Picture her in the torchlight of Pella's halls, serpents coiled near her feet, courtiers whispering in corners, rivals circling like wolves. She does not flinch. She listens. She waits. Every insult, every threat, she stores like poison in a vial, ready to uncork when the moment is right. The Serpent Queen was patient, but never harmless. And so, as Alexander grew, so too did the storm around her. Philip took other wives, each one a dagger pointed at her son's future. One in particular, Cleopatra Eurydice, Macedonian-born with noble blood that the local lords preferred, was the sharpest threat of all. If Cleopatra bore a son, Alexander's claim would be weakened, perhaps even erased. Olympias understood what this meant. A rival child was not an innocent babe. It was a seed of war. Here, in the hush of history, Olympias became more than mother. She became protector, strategist, and, if need be, executioner. For her son's throne, for his future crown, she would smile, she would wait, and when the time came, she would strike. But let us not rush ahead. Tonight, we rest with her at the threshold of destiny. She is still young, still radiant, still fierce with prophecy. The snakes at her side flicker their tongues in the firelight, as though tasting the future on the air. The omens gather. The gods, if they are watching, lean closer. In the darkness of your room, imagine her voice like a whisper through centuries. My son will not only rule, he will conquer the world, and with that vow, dear listener, the Serpent Queen awakens. The night of their union was no ordinary night. The winds whispered across the island of Samothrace, carrying with them the smoke of sacred fires and the distant murmur of waves against stone. Torches flickered in the ritual halls, their flames bowing as if in reverence, and shadows danced across the carved pillars where ancient gods were invoked. It was here that Philip, the king of Macedon, and Olympias, the priestess-princess of Epirus, were bound together in marriage. To some, it was a political bond, a weaving of alliances across mountain and sea. But to those who watched closely, to those who listened to the omens, it was more. It was prophecy dressed as matrimony, the beginning of a storm the world had never seen. Philip himself was no ordinary groom. He was a man of iron and ambition, scarred from battle, brilliant in strategy, and endlessly hungry for power. Already he had transformed Macedon from a fragile kingdom into a rising force. His eye was fixed on conquest, on glory, on the shaping of history with sword and shield. Olympias was unlike any woman he had ever known. She did not bow meekly, nor did she flatter with practiced words. She came to him clothed not only in royal garments, but in mystery itself. A woman who danced in the rites of Dionysus, who whispered to serpents, who claimed a bond with gods older than temples. To him, she was not merely a bride. she was a riddle, and he, ever the conqueror, could not resist the desire to possess both her beauty and her enigma. Legends claim that on their wedding night, lightning split the sky, striking so near the palace that the earth itself seemed to tremble. Others tell of a dream. Olympias lying in bed, and into her womb came a thunderbolt of fire, a vision of divine conception. Philip, too, dreamed. He saw himself sealing her womb with the image of a lion, a creature of kings. Were these stories true? Perhaps. Or perhaps they were the whispers of poets and priests, eager to dress the birth of a future king in celestial robes. But what matters is this: the omens were believed, and once believed, they carried the weight of truth. In time, Olympias bore a child, a boy. His name was Alexander, and from the first breath he took, prophecy clung to him like a second skin. Some said that as an infant, flames danced harmlessly around him, as if fire itself wished to serve him. Others swore that serpents coiled at the foot of his cradle, guardians of a destiny far greater than Macedon's borders. Olympias held him not as a mother holds a fragile babe, but as a priestess cradles a sacred vessel. To her, he was not simply her son. He was her offering to the world, a living thunderbolt sent by Zeus himself. And so she whispered to him not lullabies of gentle dreams, but promises of greatness. She told him he was more than human, that he was chosen, that the gods themselves had marked him for empire. In this belief, Olympias was unshakable. She had walked through ritual fires. She had danced with serpents. She had seen visions in the smoke. To her, Alexander's divinity was not a story for others. It was truth, and she lived every day as though protecting not just a child, but the embodiment of destiny. Yet destiny seldom runs smooth. Philip was king, but he was also a man of desires and politics. His marriages were many, his alliances shifting like wind through a field. Olympias was not content to fade into the background as just another wife. She held her own court, gathered her own allies, and stood fiercely against rivals. When Philip later married a Macedonian noblewoman, Cleopatra Eurydice, the threat was sharp and personal. Cleopatra's children, should she bear them, would be Macedonian-born, purer in the eyes of the lords who preferred their own blood. Olympias knew at once what this meant. Her Alexander's future was in danger. A new heir could cut him out, cast him aside, erase the prophecies she had nurtured. At the feast of this new marriage, the tension burst into the open. Cleopatra's uncle, drunk with pride and wine, insulted Olympias and Alexander, questioning the boy's legitimacy. Was he truly Philip's son, or the child of some god, as Olympias claimed? His words were meant as mockery, but Olympias seized them like a serpent striking prey. If they called her son divine, then so be it. Let the world whisper that he was more than mortal. Let them fear what they could not deny. Still, the insult cut deep. Alexander stormed from the hall in fury, and Olympias withdrew from the palace altogether, retreating to her homeland of Epirus. Yet her departure was not surrender. It was strategy. From afar, she watched, she waited, and she whispered. Her absence made her more dangerous, for she was no longer within Philip's reach, yet still within his thoughts. And then, as if history itself wished to play by the rules of prophecy, Philip was struck down, assassinated at his daughter's wedding, just as he prepared to march against Persia, just as his ambitions soared highest. The world reeled. Who had done it? Was it a wronged guard, a rival noble, Alexander himself, or Olympias watching from the shadows, the serpent queen ensuring her son's path remained unbroken. No one could prove it. No one dared. But many believed. For in the days that followed, Cleopatra Eurydice and her infant daughter were found dead. Some said Olympias ordered it. Others whispered she watched it herself. The message was unmistakable. There would be no rival bloodline. Alexander would rise, and nothing, no wife, no child, no widow, would stand in his way. To modern ears it may sound ruthless, even cruel. But in the palaces of ancient Macedon, mercy was not virtue. Mercy was weakness. Olympias had seen too many rivals fall to hesitation. She would not allow her son to be among them. And so Alexander, scarcely more than a youth, was crowned king. His father's armies, his mother's whispers, and his own brilliance carried him forward. Yet behind it all, behind the armor and the speeches, behind the victories yet to come, there was always the presence of Olympias, her serpents, her prophecies, her fierce protection. She was the storm that cleared the path for him, the shadow that whispered destiny into his ear. Tonight, as you rest, picture her not as history has sometimes painted her, cruel, jealous, venomous, but as a woman shaped by the world she lived in. A world where survival demanded strength, where prophecy was armor, where love for a child could harden into iron. Olympias was more than queen. She was the serpent awakened. And with each step she took, the world trembled, for it knew that the mother of Alexander would not rest until his throne was secure. And so, dear listener, our tale moves forward, from omens of fire and thunder to thrones and daggers, from wedding feasts to whispered curses. For in the palace of Macedon, shadows grew thick, and history itself prepared to shift beneath her hand. The palace of Pella was never still. By day, its courtyards rang with the sounds of hooves, soldiers shouting in drill, and the murmurs of courtiers bent over scrolls and maps. By night, its stone corridors held a different sound, the soft hush of whispers, the shuffle of servants who knew too much, the careful steps of rivals who measured every word like a blade. Here, Olympias lived not simply as queen but as warrior in silence. Though her weapons were not swords or shields, they were no less sharp. She wielded prophecy, ritual, and a mother's unyielding will. Around her, the palace shifted like a living labyrinth of intrigue, each corridor another test, each chamber a possible trap. Alexander, her son, grew taller, sharper of mind and spirit, trained by Aristotle himself, taught the lessons of philosophy and empire. Yet Olympias knew that wisdom alone would not secure him. The court was a nest of serpents, and even the brightest youth could fall prey to venom. So she remained at his side in spirit, even when distance separated them, whispering through letters, reminding him of the destiny that wrapped around him like armor. But shadows lengthened. Philip, her husband, her rival, her king, had remarried. Cleopatra Eurydice stood now at his side, Macedonian-born, carrying with her the approval of the lords who preferred their bloodlines untainted by foreign queens. Her uncle, Attalus, commanded armies. Her family whispered of heirs yet unborn who would be purer than Alexander, closer in blood to the Macedonian throne. For Olympias, every smile Cleopatra offered was a dagger behind silk. Every child she might bear was not innocence, but a threat sharp as steel. And so the palace became a battlefield not of armies, but of glances, rumors, and veiled words. At one feast, the storm broke open. Wine flowed, torches flickered, laughter roared. Then Attalus, drunk with arrogance, raised his cup and mocked Olympias, mocked Alexander. He questioned whether the boy was truly Philip's son or some child of divine pretense, born of Olympias's serpentine rituals. The words struck like arrows across the hall. Alexander rose, his pride aflame. For all his youth, he was already a lion in spirit. He threw his wine to the ground and stormed from the feast, refusing to endure the insult. Olympias, her eyes flashing with the fire of prophecy, withdrew soon after. She would not share her breath with those who denied her son. To the world, it seemed a rupture. To Olympias, it was strategy. She returned to Epirus, her homeland, where she remained queen in her own right. From there, she could gather support, whisper across borders, and watch the Macedonian court like a serpent waiting at the edge of the field. Distance did not weaken her. It made her more dangerous. And then, as if the gods themselves had grown weary of Philip's ambition, the blow came. On the day of his daughter's wedding, as he prepared to march against Persia, Philip was struck down by the blade of a guard. The hall that had echoed with music and vows became suddenly a place of screams. The king of Macedon fell, his shadow leaving a throne unguarded. The world asked, who had ordered it? Was it the guard seeking revenge? Was it Alexander seizing fate? Or was it Olympias, her serpent's patience at last releasing its strike? None could prove it. None dared. But whispers spread like smoke, and wherever they traveled, Olympias's name traveled with them. In the days that followed, her vengeance was unmistakable. Cleopatra Eurydice, the young queen, and her infant daughter were gone. Some said Olympias forced the mother to take her own life, that she arranged the death to be symbolic, brutal, unmerciful. Others claimed she ordered the child thrown upon a funeral pyre, a chilling message carved not in words but in blood. Cruel, perhaps, but in her eyes necessary. For Olympias understood the truth no mother wished to accept. In a palace of thrones, a rival child was not a babe. It was a spark that could ignite civil war. She would not allow Alexander's future to burn away. And so, when the smoke cleared, Alexander was king. Still a youth, but already marked by brilliance, by vision, by the weight of prophecy. He would go on to lead armies, to carve empires, to stretch the reach of Macedon to the edge of the known world. But in that moment, at the very start of his reign, his path was carved not only by his own hand, but by his mother's relentless will. Olympias had cleared the board. She had silenced rivals, secured alliances, and lit the path with the glow of omens. Her son's crown did not rest upon his brow by chance. It rested there because she had guarded it with every serpent's strike she possessed. Yet her story was not one of peace. For even as Alexander rose, Olympias remained in the shadows of his throne, watching, guiding, protecting. She was both mother and guardian of destiny, and though the world would call her ruthless, she called herself faithful. Faithful to the prophecy she had carried from her youth, faithful to the gods whose whispers she had heard in the firelight. The palace of Pella, with its torches and its whispers, had become her proving ground. There, she had shown the world that queens were not merely ornaments to kings, that mothers were not only nurturers of babes. She had shown that power could be clothed in prophecy, sharpened by motherhood, and unleashed with the patience of serpents. Tonight, as you rest, imagine the palace quiet once more. The torches sputter, the music has long faded, and in the silence sits Olympias. Her hands rest in her lap, her eyes fixed not on the walls around her but on the vision beyond them. Her son, Alexander, a youth crowned with fire, marching into history. And if you listen closely, you may hear her whisper into the darkness, not a lullaby, but a vow. He will not only wear the crown, he will command the world. And so, with serpents at her feet and omens in her breath, Olympias sat within the storm. A queen not of peace but of whispers, guarding her son's throne with a fierceness that history could neither forget nor forgive. The hall was alive with celebration. Torches blazed against polished stone. Music rose in waves, and guests leaned close with wine in hand, their voices carrying the joy of a royal wedding. Philip of Macedon walked with pride, adorned in the armor of victory, his eyes already fixed on the future. Beyond the wedding feast lay Persia, a land he dreamed of conquering, an empire waiting to be claimed. His kingdom stood united, his armies strong, and his throne, it seemed, unshakable. But in the midst of the laughter, fate waited. It lingered not with banners or drums, but with the silent step of a man carrying a dagger. A disgruntled guard, some said, a pawn in a larger game, others whispered. What is certain is this: as Philip moved through the hall, the blade found him. The king of Macedon, conqueror, builder of armies, fell to the ground, struck down in an instant. The hall that had echoed with music now filled with screams. Guests scattered, soldiers rushed, and within the chaos, history shifted. No one could say with certainty who had guided the hand that struck. Was it vengeance? Was it jealousy? Or was it the serpent queen herself, Olympias, whose patience had at last uncoiled? No proof remained, but whispers traveled faster than any messenger, and in those whispers her name flickered like firelight. What we know is this: within days, Cleopatra Eurydice, the rival queen, was no more. Some accounts tell of a rope, others of flames, still others of cruelly symbolic acts meant to remind all of Macedon that no rival child would live to threaten Alexander. However it happened, the message was clear. Olympias had struck. Her son would be king, and nothing, no widow, no infant, no rival bloodline, would stand in his way. It is tempting to see only cruelty in these acts, and indeed they were cruel. Yet pause, dear listener, and consider the world in which she lived. Macedon was not a cradle of mercy. Thrones were fragile, crowns were contested, and hesitation was often fatal. To Olympias, each rival was not merely a person but a storm waiting to break over her son's future. She had walked among serpents all her life. Now she struck as one of them. And so, in the wake of Philip's death, Alexander ascended. A youth still, but with eyes alight with brilliance, with a spirit already restless for conquest. The soldiers who had followed his father now bent their knees to him. The lords, wary but convinced, placed their trust in him. And behind it all stood Olympias, watching with the gaze of a mother who saw not just her son, but her prophecy fulfilled. Imagine her in that moment, standing at the edge of the court, serpents gliding near her feet, her face calm though the world reeled. She had guarded him with whispers, with omens, with ruthless resolve. Now he was king. Her son, the child of thunderbolts and dreams, crowned before his time yet destined, she believed, to rule far beyond Macedon's hills. For Alexander, the crown was both gift and burden. He inherited not only his father's armies, but his father's enemies. He carried not only the weight of youth, but the weight of expectation, of prophecy, of a mother's fierce vow. To be king was to stand in fire, and fire was what Olympias had prepared him for all along. Her role did not end with Philip's death. If anything, it deepened. While Alexander marched, she remained the guardian of the court, the keeper of his destiny at home. Letters passed between them, filled not with tender words but with warnings, with reminders of omens, with whispers of gods. She was his anchor and his shadow, his fiercest believer and his most relentless critic. She reminded him of who he was meant to be, even when distance and conquest threatened to distract him. But the memory of Philip's fall never left the halls of Macedon. The manner of his death, the swiftness of Olympias's vengeance lingered like smoke. Guests whispered, soldiers murmured. Some feared her, others revered her, but all knew one truth. Olympias was no ordinary queen mother. She was the Serpent Queen, and to cross her was to risk vanishing from the chronicles of history entirely. And so, Alexander's reign began in shadows. Shadows of suspicion, shadows of prophecy, shadows of serpents moving silently through the palace. He was the light rising, but Olympias was the darkness that cleared his path, the silence that swallowed his rivals. As you lie in quiet now, imagine the stillness after the storm. The torches burn lower, the screams of Philip's death have faded, and in their place is silence. Olympias sits in her chamber, the firelight soft on her face, her serpents coiled and breathing steadily. She does not smile, not in triumph, for she knows the journey is far from over. But her eyes are steady, her heart unshaken. Her son is king, the prophecy holds, and the serpent has struck. Far from Macedon's thrones and whispers lies another world, older still, where time itself seems to fold into myth. On the island of Crete, beneath the warmth of the Mediterranean sun, there once rose a palace unlike any other. Knossos, the beating heart of the Minoan civilization. Even now, its ruins rest beneath the soil, corridors twisting, staircases vanishing, rooms spiraling like a dream half-remembered. When you walk through what remains, the walls seem to breathe with secrets. Stones shaped thousands of years ago still carry the echo of footsteps. Light falls through narrow wells, shifting with the day, painting the chambers with patterns of shadow and sun. Nothing moves in a straight line. Corridors double back, stairs rise only to vanish. Rooms open into more rooms, some small as cupboards, others grand as courts. To us, it is a ruin. To the ancient Greeks, it was something else entirely, a labyrinth. The myth is well known, whispered from generation to generation. In its heart lurked the Minotaur, half man, half bull, born of shame and divine punishment. Each year, Athens sent youths, 7 boys, 7 girls, to be devoured by the beast. Only Theseus, the Athenian hero, entered and returned, guided by the thread of Ariadne. The story still lingers, stitched into the fabric of Western imagination, retold in books, in paintings, in bedtime stories like this one. But where did such a myth come from? Perhaps from the palace itself. Knossos was no ordinary dwelling. It was vast, more than 1,000 rooms woven together, built across levels, a city under a roof. To a visitor from the mainland, it would have felt like stepping into another world, one both wondrous and unsettling. The bull, sacred to the Minoans, appeared everywhere, painted on walls, carved in stone, shaped in gold. Horns crowned rooftops, frescoes showed acrobats vaulting over charging bulls, fearless and graceful. Imagine such a place through ancient eyes, the halls disorienting, the air cool with the scent of plaster and paint, the echoes endless. To walk through Knossos was to lose one's sense of direction, to feel at once awed and uneasy. Was it so strange, then, that visitors turned awe into myth? That they whispered of monsters within the maze, of youths lost in winding passages, of threads needed to find the way back to the light? The Minotaur may never have lived, but the labyrinth itself was real, and in its winding corridors, truth and legend became indistinguishable. Even now, when archaeologists trace its stones, the palace feels alive. They find rooms once filled with jars of oil and wine, workshops of artisans, shrines tucked into corners where goddesses stood with snakes in their hands. They uncover frescoes of dolphins dancing in blue seas, lilies blooming across walls, women in flounced skirts, radiant and free. It is a world far gentler than the Greece that followed, a culture that celebrated beauty, nature, and dance rather than war. And yet, beneath that beauty lingers mystery. Why so many passages? Why such disorienting design? Was it only architecture, or was it ritual? Did the Minoans create a palace that was itself a spiritual journey? A place where worshippers wandered in patterns meant to mirror the turning of stars or the cycles of life and death? We cannot know for certain. Their script, Linear A, has never been deciphered. Their voices remain locked in symbols we cannot read. So we are left with questions, and questions make myths. The labyrinth is one such answer. A story that explains the feeling of being lost, of being overwhelmed, of facing something strange and powerful at the heart of mystery. Tonight, as you rest, let us wander the halls of Knossos together. Picture torches flickering on plaster walls painted with red and gold. Picture the air cool and still, the sound of your steps soft against stone. Corridors turn, open, and turn again. You pass a chamber filled with jars taller than men, their bellies once swollen with grain or oil. You pass a stairway that rises toward the light, only to vanish into shadow above, and deeper you go, always deeper. The air seems to hum. The walls seem to lean close as if listening, and in the quiet of your imagination you hear it, the faint echo of hooves, the low breath of something vast, waiting at the heart. Is it a beast? Is it only the wind? You do not know. That is the secret of labyrinths. They are not only places, they are feelings, journeys into the unknown. Perhaps that is why the myth endures. We all carry labyrinths within us, paths that twist through memory, corridors of fear and hope, chambers filled with secrets. The Minotaur is the darkness we meet at the center, and the thread of Ariadne is the hope that leads us back again. So tonight, dear listener, as you drift between waking and sleep, think of Knossos not as ruin but as dream. Think of its labyrinth not as prison but as symbol. And think of the Minotaur not as monster, but as the shadow we all must face within ourselves. For history and myth are not separate. They are threads woven into the same tapestry. And as we follow them, step by step, we find ourselves walking not only through the past, but through the corridors of our own hearts. The labyrinth is never finished. It waits for us all. Castles sleep beneath the moonlight, their towers rising like guardians against the sky. Their walls, built of stone and silence, seem eternal. And yet, through history, there have always been those who dreamed of breaking them. To imagine a siege is to imagine patience. Armies did not rush against walls like waves upon rock. They lingered, they built, they waited. Outside the gates, great machines rose, groaning with timber and iron, creations that were part weapon, part ritual. They were not only built to destroy, they were built to terrify. For when one of these giants rolled into view, defenders on the walls would feel their courage tremble, as though fate itself had arrived on wheels. The battering ram was the simplest of these. At first, it was nothing more than a tree trunk, lifted by many hands, swung with force against a gate. But in time, it grew into something greater, a beam suspended within a wooden frame, its head capped with iron, its body shielded by a roof of hides soaked in water. Imagine the sound of it, steady and relentless, thud, thud, thud. Each strike a heartbeat of doom against the gate. To those inside, it must have sounded like thunder echoing through their bones. But walls were stubborn things. And so the ram was joined by its cousins, the catapult, for instance, which hurled stones not with hands, but with the coiled tension of rope and sinew. To stand on a wall and see a boulder arc through the air, blotting out the sky for a heartbeat, must have been to feel very small indeed. Sometimes these machines launched not only stones, but fire or messages, or grim reminders in the form of severed heads. Yet, in the quiet of history, let us soften the image. Think, instead of a stone's long arc, a graceful curve against the horizon, as though even in war, the earth remembered how to draw poetry in the air. Then came the trebuchet, the king of siege engines. Taller than houses, groaning with counterweights, it swung its arm like a slow-motion hammer of the heavens. With a single release, it could hurl stones the size of furniture far beyond the walls, crashing into towers, cratering courtyards. Yet, for all its power, the trebuchet was strangely graceful. Its movement was measured, its rhythm predictable, like the pendulum of a giant clock. To watch one was to feel the inevitability of time itself, steady, unhurried, unstoppable. There were siege towers, too, wooden giants on wheels, covered in hides, bristling with ladders and platforms. They rolled toward the walls like moving fortresses, carrying soldiers within their bellies. From their tops, archers loosed arrows downward, while the lower decks opened bridges to the battlements. To the defenders, they must have seemed like nightmares made of timber, rising taller with each turn of the wheel. To us, they can be imagined as strange, dreamlike creatures, castles on legs, walking toward castles at rest. And beneath the earth, another kind of siege took place. Tunnels were dug, winding like secret routes toward the foundations of walls. Wooden beams held them up, and when fire consumed those beams, the earth itself betrayed the defenders. Walls cracked, towers crumbled, and the sky poured in where once stone had stood. To dig such tunnels was to crawl in darkness, to hear only the scrape of shovels, to wait for the sound of enemy digging above or below. It was war fought in silence, a hidden struggle deep in the earth. All of these, rams, catapults, trebuchets, towers, tunnels, were not just weapons. They were messages. They told defenders, your walls are not forever, your safety is not certain. And so, even before the first stone fell, fear gnawed at those inside. Yet let us remember, too, the defenders. On the walls they poured boiling oil, dropped stones, lit fire arrows. They watched with steady eyes as machines rolled closer, and they answered with ingenuity born of desperation. A castle was not only stone, it was the courage of those within, the prayers whispered as the night filled with the sound of hammers and wheels. And so, through centuries, walls remembered. They remembered the strike of rams, the arc of stones, the rumble of towers. They bore the scars of fire, the cracks of time, the whispers of fear. Some still stand today, their stones weathered but unbroken, silent witnesses to sieges long past. As you rest now, imagine the field beyond a medieval wall. The night is still, the machines sleep, their timbers dark against the stars. Soldiers lie by their campfires, their voices hushed. On the wall, a single guard walks, his torch flickering. He looks out into the dark and sees the looming shapes of rams and towers. Silent, waiting. Tomorrow they will wake. Tomorrow the thunder will begin again. But tonight, only the silence of wood and stone holds sway. History remembers these machines as tools of war. But tonight, in the calm of your dreams, let us think of them differently. Let us see them as giants of a forgotten age, carved from timber and rope, whispering the old secret of walls, that nothing built by human hands is forever, and yet everything built carries memory. And perhaps in some quiet way, those memories remain. In stones that once trembled, in timbers that once groaned, in ruins that still hum with echoes of sieges long past. The walls remember, and so do we. If siege engines were giants built to terrify, then the defenders of the walls were dreamers who answered to terror with fire, wit, and stubborn courage. Castles were not only stone, they were living hearts, filled with cooks and children, scribes and soldiers, all of them clinging to the safety of walls. And when those walls trembled, they did not always fall quietly. Imagine standing high upon a battlement at night. Below, in the dim fields, shadows move, rams waiting, trebuchets looming, towers inching closer. The enemy does not sleep, and neither do you. The torch in your hand sputters. The wind tugs at your cloak, and in your chest, your heart drums with the weight of duty. What do you have against such monsters of wood and iron? Only what cleverness and courage can make from the tools of the world. The most feared answer was fire. Not ordinary fire, but something older, stranger. A secret the Byzantines once called Greek fire. No one today knows exactly how it was made. Perhaps it was oil, perhaps resin, perhaps the alchemy of salt and sulfur. What mattered was this. Once lit, it clung like a living thing. It burned upon water. It curled around wood. It clutched at flesh. To see it hurled from a siphon was to see a dragon breathe across the sea. Entire fleets were undone by its roar, ships consumed as if swallowed by a beast of flame. On castle walls, defenders made their own simpler fires. Cauldrons of pitch or boiling oil were tipped from above, spilling through murder holes, the narrow slits in the gatehouse ceilings. Imagine the hiss of oil striking wood, the screams that rose as fire leapt from cloth to skin. It was brutal, yes, but to those on the wall it was also survival. They could not match the enemy's numbers. They could only make the walls themselves roar in their defense. Sometimes they used not fire but boiling water, humble, ordinary, yet deadly in its sudden heat. Poured upon armored men climbing ladders, it seeped into the cracks, scalding the flesh beneath. Even sand was turned into a weapon, heated until it burned like a hidden ember. It trickled beneath helmets, beneath collars, into gloves, searing skin where steel could not protect. And there was more than heat. Defenders turned to the weight of gravity itself. Stones, massive and rough, were pushed from parapets, crashing onto machines below. Logs rolled down, ramps, smashing ladders, scattering soldiers. Even the simplest things, barrels, beams, discarded rubble, became weapons when dropped from on high. But perhaps the greatest weapon was not fire or stone, but imagination. Defenders dug ditches, flooded moats, built false walls that lured towers into traps. They stretched chains across rivers to halt ships, scattered spikes in grass where feet would rush, crafted gates within gates so that even if one barrier fell, another waited. Castles were puzzles, layered and cunning, designed not only to resist but to confuse, to delay, to exhaust. Each delay mattered. Every hour bought by fire or stone was another hour for reinforcements to march, for supplies to dwindle, for sickness to creep into the enemy's camp. In siege, time itself was an ally, and defenders knew how to stretch it with every trick they possessed. Yet, even in the heat of battle, there was a strange beauty. Picture it not in screams, but in images softened by distance. The glow of firepots arcing through the night, their trails bright against the sky like falling stars. The steam of boiling water rising in pale clouds, catching torchlight in soft halos. The rhythm of stones falling, steady as a drumbeat. In their desperate creativity, defenders wove a kind of grim music, the song of survival echoing from walls to sky. And when dawn came, sometimes the attackers would see not a broken gate, but a wall blackened with smoke, scarred but unfallen. The machines outside might be scorched, their timbers twisted. The air might still smell of pitch and ash, and upon the wall, weary figures would stand, their eyes hollow with sleeplessness, but their hands steady still. They had endured another night. In the quiet of your imagination, let us soften the edges. See the defenders not as warriors alone, but as people like us, parents, sons, daughters, holding fast because behind them were homes, chapels, markets, lives too precious to surrender. Their fires were not born of cruelty, but of necessity. They lit the night so that morning might come. Tonight, as you rest, picture a castle wall in darkness. Torches glow faintly. Beyond, the shapes of siege engines loom, waiting. But upon the wall, a small flame burns steady, tended by tired hands. It is not the flame of destruction, but of endurance. It is the fire of those who hold on when all else trembles. And that, perhaps, is the truest fire of the defenders. Not the burning oil or the secret formulas lost to time, but the quiet spark of resilience, the refusal to yield, the courage to believe that walls, though battered, could still hold. The walls remember their attackers, but they remember their defenders most of all. History is a long night filled with many voices. Some speak loudly, kings and generals, their names carved into stone. Others whisper, moving through corridors unseen, their footsteps fading almost before they are made. And most, the peasants, the mothers, the children, pass quietly, their lives leaving no record at all, like stars that burn briefly and vanish into dawn. We have wandered together through such voices. We began with assassins, figures hidden in shadow, whose knives glinted only for an instant before the darkness swallowed them whole. They did not live as legends. They lived as ghosts, driven by hunger, by desperation, by the cruel weight of coin. Their stories remind us that history is not only the tale of the powerful, but also of the forgotten. Then we walked into the torchlight of Macedon, where Olympias, serpent queen and mother of Alexander, guarded her son's throne with the fire of prophecy. She was not soft, not merciful, but she was fierce in her love and her belief. In her world, love was a shield sharpened into a blade, and prophecy was armor against betrayal. She may have been feared, she may have been hated, but she was never ignored. And through her, We saw how history can be shaped not only by kings, but by mothers who refuse to bow. From there, we wandered deeper into time, into the dreamlike halls of Knossos, where myth and stone blurred together. The labyrinth, winding and endless, invited us to lose ourselves in its silence. The Minotaur waited in its heart, not only as a monster of story, but as a symbol of the darkness within us all, the fears and questions we carry through the corridors of our own minds. In that place, history became legend, and legend became a mirror. And finally, we stood before the walls of castles, where engines of war rose like giants and fire poured from ramparts. We watched as rams struck, as trebuchets swung, as towers rolled forward like wooden mountains. And we saw defenders answering with fire, with stone, with courage that glowed even in the darkest night. In their struggle, we learned not only of war, but of endurance, of the human will to hold on even when the world itself seems to batter at the gates. Now, as our journey closes, let us draw the threads together. What do assassins, queens, labyrinths, and siege engines share? At first glance, they are worlds apart, but beneath the surface they all whisper the same truth: that power, in all its forms, is fragile. The assassin learns this in silence, for no coin can buy safety when betrayal is always waiting. The queen learns this in fire, for even crowns do not protect against the envy of rivals. The labyrinth teaches it in mystery, for even the strongest must face the darkness within. And the siege engines roar it across the centuries, for even the tallest walls will one day crack, no matter how thickly they are built. Power fades, walls crumble, names once feared are forgotten, yet something remains. Not the noise, not the blood, but the quiet echo that lingers after. The silence. It is in silence that the assassin disappears, unremembered. It is in silence that Olympias meets her end, regal even in defeat. It is in silence that Knossos rests, its stones humming softly beneath the earth. And it is in silence that ruined castles sleep, their towers broken but their stories still breathing. Perhaps, dear listener, that is the gift of history. Not certainty, not permanence, but the reminder that all things, triumph and terror alike, pass into quiet. And in that quiet, we find rest. As you lie here, let the images drift gently away. The hooded figure in the alley fades into shadow. The serpent queen lowers her crown and closes her eyes. The labyrinth unravels into a thread of light, guiding you back toward safety. The siege engines creak once more, then fall silent, their timbers returning to dust. The night holds them all as it holds us now. And in that vast, timeless silence, there is peace. So close your eyes, breathe softly, and let history become dream. The assassins no longer run. The queens no longer plot. The walls no longer tremble. There is only the quiet hum of time, the steady heartbeat of the world, the gentle rhythm that carries us all toward morning. The story is finished. The night is yours.